Kev 2D says, do you think humans are designed to love more than one person at the same time? And in romantically. I always wondered when people break up, then have a new partner, you know. Well, good question. You know, before I tell you, I give you my answer, I want to tell you a little anecdote. Nasruddin was a Turkish philosopher of thousands of years ago. And one day he was traveling with his camel driver, and they were going to city by city. And every city they would get, people would gather around. He would go on the podium and he would get a sermon, a speech about philosophy and life and so on and so forth. So then they would go to the next, they would start going toward the next city with this camel driver, and then they would, camp behind the city the night before, and then they go into the city the next day. Again, groups would gather, he goes on the podium, and he would give the same speech. It was about 10, 11 nights they did that, different cities, 11 different cities, and then one night when they were sitting and camping outskirts of the next city that they had to speak, he had to speak at in the morning, his camel driver says, you know what, Mullah, this is not a big deal. I can do exact same speech as you do, just as good. It's not a big deal you're doing. Well, of course he could, because he had heard it 11 times and he had memorized it. And Nasruddin says, well, okay, no problems. In next city tomorrow, they don't know me. So we switch places. I become the camel driver and you sit on the camel, and you become Nasruddin and I'll be the camel driver. And the camel driver says, sure thing, no big deal, I can do it. So sure enough, they entered the city the next day, and now the camel driver sitting on the camel is the Nasruddin, and Nasruddin is being the camel driver. So they introduce him, and he goes on the podium, the camel driver, and he gives a speech just as good as Nasruddin himself, because he had heard it for 11 nights and he had memorized it. Until it came to the question and answer period. And somebody asked a question, and that was a really juicy question. It was a hard question. And the camel driver, of course, not knowing a thing or two from whatever he talked about, he was like a parrot, just repeated whatever he had heard from Nasruddin. He didn't know the answer, naturally. And he thought it through and says, you know what? This question is so simple that even my camel driver can answer it. And he looked at Nasruddin to come. So now I'm looking for my camel driver. See if I can get help to answer this question. Okay, now, well, what you're referring to is ability to love. And yes, we are capable to love many things in life. We can love a flower, we can love a tree, we can love a dog, our animal, like we love a horse, we can love our family, we can love our children and friends. A different love, but you're talking romantically. First, in order to address that, we got to understand what love is. If you're referring to love at that feeling of arousement, like being aroused, being horny, and physically aroused, that's not love, that's lust. And we are capable to have lust. If you're a heterosexual male, you're programmed in your genes for procreation, to love woman, to pursue woman, and you can have lust for any woman, whether you're married to her or not. That's a capability of a human being. But that's not love. That's lust. If you're talking about love, let's understand what love is. What is love? When people say, let's make love. I mean, you can't make love. What is it? That's having sex. That's not making love. What do you call it making love? When you say I love you to your girlfriend or your wife, do you really mean you love her, or you love what she does for you? Do you know her? To love someone, you got to know that person, right? And to know that person means you got to know her fears, her desire, her thoughts, her consciousness, her ego. Do you know all that? Because that is the person. Unless you know all that, how can you love that person? That's why when a person says, oh, I fell in love today, you can't fall in love with her. You gotta know that person, and that means time, interaction, negotiation life, and seeing each other in action of negotiating your daily lives, and to see how you treat each other, how your consciousness works, how your thoughts are formed, what your fears and desires and egos and pleasure, and how you deal with the whole challenges of life, the concept of life. So then you know that person. Now, in relation to you, you can see if you love that person, her existence. So what we are talking about romantically loving, I don't think there's anything like that, such a thing. Because if you love that person. And if you love, that's beyond the lust and romantically love. And there's only one kind of love, which is profound. But of course, different kind of loves I'm talking about. Of course, we don't deny that. But when you say romantic love, you can always love one person romantically, the way you're saying it, because that itself needs lots of knowing about that person. And that knowing means knowing all the fragments and ingredients of the consciousness that we just talked about. That takes time. What kind of a time do you have in life to have that kind of an opportunity and know-how about so many different people that then you can say, oh, I can love more than one? That won't happen. Even one of them, it needs a lifetime. So if you separate the love and lust, then you have your answer. You can have lust for many, but you can't have love for many in the same way that we talked about, in the quality that we talked about, in the depth that we talked about at the same time. One after the other, yeah, you let go one, you focus on the other one, and that takes another bunch of time, a long while, before you get to know that person, and then to see if in relation to you, you can express that emotion, resonance, frequency called love. I hope that was something for you to ponder on.